The forest begins long before humanity learns to name it, rising from the slow exhalation of ancient earth, when continents had not yet settled into their familiar forms, and the air itself was still experimenting with the balance of life. In those primordial ages, when the seas ruled over nearly every horizon and the land waited bare and silent, the first mosses crept forward like explorers driven by an instinct older than memory. They clung to stone, endured storms of a kind no human eye has ever witnessed, and in their stubborn persistence, they prepared the way for what would one day become the great forests. Lycopods unfurled next, towering in their time, but strange compared to the giants that would come later, with trunks thin as reeds and spores drifting in the wind like invisible whispers of a world in the making. The Carboniferous swamps thickened with vegetation so dense that sunlight bled into greenish gloom, and the atmosphere soaked up the oxygen released by those early plant empires, until even insects grew to sizes that would seem monstrous to us now. Dragonflies with wings wider than a man's shoulders, weaving between the trunks of scaled trees that rose in elegant spirals. As epochs shifted and the earth reimagined itself, the forests changed their architects. Gymnosperms appeared, their cones sheltering seeds that could wait through drought and cold, and among them the ancestors of pines and cycads spread outward like a second wave of botanical conquest. They marched across continents that still drifted as loosely joined landmasses, blanketing slopes and valleys long before mammals or birds found their place among their branches. These forests witnessed the slow crawl of reptilian dynasties that would someday give rise to dinosaurs, and the trees themselves adapted to survive the heavy-footed titans that brushed against them as casually as a man might brush aside a curtain. In this deep history, forests were not the quiet sanctuaries we imagine today, but vast, rumbling stages upon which evolution performed its grandest improvisations. Each layer of leaf litter was a chapter, each root a careful negotiation with stone and soil, each canopy a new experiment in how to harness the sun. Then, in the shadow of continents reshaping themselves, the first ancestors of broadleaf trees appeared, bringing with them the promise of color beyond green's endless reign. Magnolias opened their waxy petals to pollinators that had just begun their delicate partnership with flowering plants, and by the time the Cretaceous period hummed with insect life, forests had become vibrant marketplaces of scent and color, each bloom advertising its delicate transaction with bees, beetles, or even early birds. The fall of the dinosaurs did not silence these forests. It merely gave rise to new voices. Mammals, small at first and timid beneath the weight of catastrophe, soon found in the recovering woodlands a labyrinth of opportunity. The forests thickened into biodiversity engines whose intricate relationships would take tens of millions of years to weave, each strand binding species to one another in quiet but essential interdependence.
By the time early primates began their cautious descent from the trees, the forests had already evolved into realms of immense complexity. Sunlight filtered through corridors of leaves sculpted by eons of adaptation, casting shifting patterns onto the forest floor, where orchids, ferns, and fungi conducted their own dramas. In the canopies, monkeys leapt with limbs shaped by generations of arboreal acrobatics, and in the shadows below, predators waited in their patient dance with survival. The forest was neither benevolent nor cruel. It simply persisted, rewriting itself as climates shifted and oceans inhaled and exhaled their rhythms against distant shores. When the first humans emerged and began wandering through the forests of Africa, they entered worlds shaped by forces far older than their own species. These early hominins foraged among roots and fruits long before they understood how to track seasons or read the language of leaves, and the forest became both cradle and challenge. It offered sustenance, shelter, and raw materials, yet demanded observation, caution, and respect. In time, as our ancestors learned to understand the patterns of animal migrations, the timing of fruiting trees, and the hidden paths of rivers beneath canopies so dense that daylight seemed to drip rather than shine, they forged a bond with the forest that would echo across millennia. As humans spread out of Africa and into Eurasia, they encountered forests of entirely different temperaments. The boreal vastness of the north stretched like a somber hymn, its conifers standing in disciplined ranks, their needles whispering secrets of ice and endurance. The taiga did not welcome easily. Winters crushed the unprepared, and summers thrummed with insects so numerous they seemed like a living veil. Yet even here, humans found ways to live alongside the trees. They learned to read the tracks pressed into snow, to fashion shelters from the resinous woods, and to follow the migrations of reindeer and elk through landscapes where each season carved its signature with merciless precision. In these northern forests, fire was both ally and adversary, sweeping across the land in cycles that renewed the soil, even as they demanded resilience from those who dwelled there. Further south, in temperate regions where seasons danced in more forgiving rhythms, forests developed a different character. Oaks unfurled broad canopies under which entire microcosms flourished, their roots twisting into networks that communicated disturbances long before human science would uncover such phenomena. These deciduous forests, rich in berries, nuts, herbs, and game, became crossroads of early human settlement. People fashioned tools from yew, bows from elm, and shelters from birch, weaving the presence of trees into the fabric of their earliest myths. Forests became sacred spaces long before writing existed, realms where spirits dwelled, where hunters sought guidance, and where communities marked the turning of the seasons through rituals conducted beneath ancient trunks whose rings recorded the passing of countless generations.
In the woodlands of ancient Europe, tribes carved pathways through dense growths of beech and ash, each trail becoming a thread that bound distant settlements. These early peoples learned that forests offered not only food, but stories, for every root that buckled the earth spoke of storms survived, and every fallen log carried the history of fungi and insects that decomposed it. As metalworking advanced, iron tools allowed communities to shape the forests more intentionally, though never easily. To fell a single large tree required cooperation, strength, and time, and so human relationship with forests remained one of cautious negotiation. Even as civilizations grew, the forest maintained its authority, shaping trade routes, influencing warfare, and determining where towns could flourish. Across the world, other cultures formed their own intimate histories with forests. In East Asia, the cedar and cypress groves of ancient China became symbols of longevity and philosophical contemplation. Scholars wandered through bamboo thickets, hearing in the rustle of leaves the whispered lessons of nature's balance. The forest fed the nation's early apothecaries, supplying herbs with medicinal properties cataloged in texts that would guide healers for centuries. Entire schools of thought grew from observing the behavior of forest creatures, the patterns of growth and decay, and the principles of harmony embedded in the green labyrinths of the land. Temples nestled among pine-covered mountains became sanctuaries where monks lived in quiet symbiosis with their surroundings, illuminating scrolls by lamplight while listening to the sighs of the wind through treetops older than their dynasties. Meanwhile, in the Indian subcontinent, forests were not merely resources, but divine realms. Texts from antiquity describe sages retreating into the woods to seek enlightenment, living among banyan trees whose aerial roots formed natural cloisters of shade. The forest was revered as a place where the human world intersected with the cosmic, where gods revealed themselves through subtle signs, and where knowledge could be attained only through patience and rigorous self-discipline. Tigers padded through undergrowth thick with monsoon moisture, and elephants carved paths through the jungle, altering the landscape with each journey. These forests shaped the rhythms of early Indian kingdoms, influencing agriculture, trade, and political boundaries that grew around rather than against the natural terrain. Across the oceans, the Americas were home to forests of staggering diversity. In the Amazon basin, countless indigenous peoples lived within a biome so intricate that even after centuries of study, humanity has cataloged only a fraction of its life. To walk through these forests was to step into a world where the line between earth and sky blurred, where vines coiled around trunks like ancient serpents, and where the constant hum of insects formed a symphony that never ceased. Indigenous knowledge, passed orally from generation to generation, revealed an understanding of forest ecology that modern science would only begin to appreciate. Which plants healed wounds, which bark yielded dyes, which rivers changed course during floods, and which trees summoned birds whose calls warned of approaching storms. The forest was not a backdrop, but a living, breathing entity with which entire cultures formed reciprocal relationships.
Far to the north, the redwoods and sequoias of the Pacific coast rose like living monuments, their colossal trunks dwarfing everything around them. For thousands of years, indigenous nations built their societies in harmony with these ancient giants, crafting canoes from fallen logs and weaving stories that honored the spirits dwelling in the forest's cathedral-like spaces. These trees had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations across the world, yet they stood in silent majesty, absorbing sunlight through crowns that soared higher than nearly any living organism on Earth. Their bark resisted fire, insects, and decay with a stubbornness that allowed some to reach ages surpassing 2 millennia, each century etched into growth rings like nested scrolls, documenting droughts, volcanic eruptions, and seismic shifts. And still, across the Pacific, the forests of Japan developed their own distinct character, shaped by volcanic soil, relentless rainfall, and cultural reverence. Shinto beliefs celebrated the presence of kami, spirits believed to reside in natural features, and groves near shrines became protected sanctuaries where certain trees were honored as living deities. The cedar-lined approach to sacred sites created immersive corridors of serenity, encouraging contemplation as visitors ascended stone steps worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The connection between forests and craftsmanship flourished as artisans selected specific woods for temples, instruments, and ceremonial objects, always mindful of seasonal cycles and sustainable practices passed down with meticulous respect for balance. As centuries unfolded and human societies expanded, forests increasingly became silent witnesses to the rise of kingdoms whose fortunes depended on the timber they harvested, the game they hunted, and the strategic shelter the trees provided. In medieval Europe, monarchs declared vast tracts of woodland as royal forests, not to preserve them for nature's sake, but to control access to valuable resources such as deer, wild boar, and hardwoods essential for shipbuilding. These royal forests became political instruments, shaping laws that determined who could gather firewood, who could hunt, and who would face severe penalties for trespassing beyond permitted boundaries. Under their shaded canopies, villagers whispered stories of outlaws who defied authority, drawing on the forest's labyrinthine geography to elude pursuers. Trails twisted through groves lit only by narrow slices of sunlight, making the woods not just a refuge, but a symbol of resistance, where legends grew alongside oaks that had germinated long before the first castle stones were set. In Scandinavia, Forests shaped entire cultures built upon the mastery of wood. Norse shipwrights selected straight-grained pine and oak to craft vessels capable of crossing turbulent seas, their hulls flexing with the waves as though alive. These trees, harvested with rituals acknowledging the forest's power, became the backbone of voyages that carried explorers to Iceland, Greenland, and even the North American shores. In the sagas woven by skalds beside crackling fires, forests appeared both as mystical realms and as practical lifelines, providing tar for ships, timber for hulls, and game to sustain communities through bitter winters. Every log bore the memory of its place within the greater woodland, and each plank that formed a long ship carried with it the quiet endurance of the tree it once was. In the heart of Central Europe, the great beech and spruce forests influenced settlement patterns and commerce. The dense woodlands of the Black Forest, alive with legends of spirits, wolves, and wandering miners, provided charcoal for smelting operations that fueled early metallurgy. Artisans carved intricate cuckoo clocks and musical instruments from the finely grained wood, transforming the forest into an engine of regional identity and trade. Caravans passed through narrow valleys lined with firs that seemed to lean inward like guardians, their branches catching the faintest dusting of snow in early winter. The forest floor hummed with life unseen, and even as towns expanded, the vast interior wilderness offered refuge to hermits, pilgrims, and countless species that had adapted to its dimly lit understory. Traveling eastward, the immense forests of Siberia stretched so far that they seemed to swallow the horizon, an ocean of green that remained largely untouched for millennia. Taiga landscapes dominated by larch, pine, and birch were home to reindeer herders whose survival depended on understanding migratory routes and the subtle signals carried by the wind. In these remote territories, forests dictated the rhythm of existence. Summers brief and intense, winters long and punishing. Hunters moved silently between trunks dusted with frost, tracking sable and elk while reading the snow like a living script. Shamanic traditions intertwined with the forest, seeing the spirits of ancestors in the flicker of auroras above treetops, and believing that certain groves held portals between worlds. Such cosmologies revealed how deeply forests informed every aspect of life, shaping not only survival strategies, but the very framework of belief. In Southeast Asia, forests glowed with a different sort of vibrancy. Dipterocarps towered above dense jungles where humidity clung to every leaf, and the complex web of life included creatures with behaviors as elaborate as their environments. Hornbills, with their resonant calls, carried seeds across great distances, effectively engineering the forest's future. Orangutans moved deliberately among branches, demonstrating a patience that mirrored the slow cycles of tropical tree growth. Indigenous groups, such as the Dayak of Borneo, built longhouses near forest edges, weaving rattan from jungle vines and carving ceremonial masks from hardwoods with an intimacy born of generations observing the forest's seasonal cues. Harvesting resin, fruit, and medicinal plants required deep knowledge of the forest's unwritten rules, a knowledge tested each time monsoons redrew riverbanks and reshaped the forest floor. In Africa, forests took countless forms, from the Congo Basin's impenetrable green vastness to the coastal mangroves that threaded waterways like natural fortresses. The Congo Basin, second only to the Amazon in scale, pulsed with life that flourished in every vertical layer, towering emergent trees reaching for light, mid-level canopies bustling with primates and birds, and shadowy undergrowth where okapi stepped delicately through patches of filtered sunlight. Tribal communities such as the Aka and Baka navigated this world with astonishing fluidity, their songs echoing through the canopy as coded messages guiding hunts, rituals, and communal knowledge. Sacred groves dotted the landscape, places where spirits were believed to reside, and where cutting even a single branch required ceremonial permission. Here, the forest was not merely an environment, but a living archive of ancestry and wisdom. Its stories carried through oral traditions that honored every creature and every tree.
In Australia, forests and woodlands reflected the continent's unique ancient lineage. Eucalyptus trees dominated much of the land, their aromatic oils perfuming the air and creating volatile conditions that shaped the region's fire-dependent ecosystems. Aboriginal peoples mastered techniques of controlled burning long before Europeans arrived, using fire stick farming to clear underbrush, encourage fresh plant growth, and guide animal migrations. These low-intensity burns not only reduced the risk of catastrophic wildfires, but also cultivated conditions for species like the grass tree and certain acacias to thrive. The forest was inseparable from culture, and creation stories, or dreamtime narratives, wove landscapes into spiritual genealogies, explaining how ancestral beings shaped rivers, carved valleys, and planted the first seeds of life. Each tree, from towering mountain ash to gnarled mulga scrub, held a place within a cosmology that transcended physical geography. The Polynesian islands, though far smaller in landmass, boasted forests that determined the fate of entire societies. On Easter Island, palms once soared above the landscape, providing wood for canoes, shelters, and the tools required to carve the monumental moai. As populations grew and resources strained under pressure, deforestation contributed to dramatic societal shifts that later observers would try to piece together from pollen records, oral histories, and archaeological remains. Conversely, on islands like Hawaii, careful management of upland forests allowed for sustainable construction of canoes capable of navigating vast ocean distances. The wood of the koa tree, prized for its strength and beauty, became central to cultural craftsmanship, while the upland cloud forests filtered rainfall into aquifers that sustained agriculture in the lowlands. These trees, standing tall in mist-choked terrain, acted as pillars supporting entire island ecosystems. In Central and South America, pre-Columbian civilizations left behind arboreal legacies woven intricately into their histories. The Maya carved their cities into the rainforests of the Yucatan, building pyramids that rose above canopies filled with toucans, spider monkeys, and ceiba trees considered sacred. The ceiba, with its massive buttress roots and towering form, symbolized the axis mundi, the world tree connecting the underworld, earth, and heavens. Maya scribes depicted these connections in codices, illustrating gods emerging from blossoms and serpents coiling around trunks that bridged cosmic realms. The Inca, although dwelling largely in mountainous terrain, depended on forests of the Andean slopes for construction materials and medicinal plants, trading with Amazonian communities through elaborate networks that spanned altitudes and climates. In these regions, forests acted as arteries of political, spiritual, and economic life. Across time, forests shaped human warfare as decisively as they shaped peace. Armies used forests as natural barriers, hiding troops among thickets where ambushes could alter the course of battles. Roman legions famously marched into the Teutoburg forest expecting a routine operation, only to be decimated by Germanic forces who knew every ravine and moss-covered root. The dense canopy muffled sounds, distorted distances, and turned the forest into a strategic ally for those who understood its intricacies. Centuries later, revolutionaries and partisans in various conflicts relied on forests to outmaneuver superior forces, using hidden trails and temporary camps that vanished beneath leaf litter once abandoned. The forest became both shield and sword, influencing military strategies across continents.
As the medieval period gave way to early modern times, forests faced pressures that would alter them more drastically than any natural cycle. Shipbuilding demanded vast quantities of timber, especially oak, which became the backbone of naval empires. England, France, and Spain, and other maritime powers surveyed their forests with new eyes, calculating how many ships each grove could yield. Massive trees that had stood for centuries were felled in coordinated efforts to expand fleets, and governments imposed regulations on timber harvesting to ensure that military ambitions did not exhaust national resources. Wood was not only for ships, it was fuel for heating, smelting, and construction. Entire landscapes transformed as trees gave way to pastures, farms, and towns, reshaping the relationship between forests and human societies. Still, the forests themselves proved remarkably resilient. Some areas reclaimed abandoned farmland as people migrated to cities during industrialization, allowing young woodlands to sprout where plows once turned the soil. In other regions, however, industrial demand intensified deforestation beyond natural recovery rates. Steam engines consumed coal, but the tools and infrastructure surrounding industrial expansion still devoured timber at staggering rates. Railways required ties cut from durable woods, and telegraph lines marched across continents with poles sourced from forests that had no concept of the technological revolutions unfolding at their expense. As industry tightened its grip on the 19th century, forests became arenas where competing visions of progress and preservation collided. Naturalists who wandered through remaining old-growth stands recognized that these towering cathedrals of wood, some trees older than nations, some ecosystems older than human civilization itself, held stories etched in bark and root that could not be replaced once erased. Scientists recorded species that existed nowhere else on Earth, while artists painted landscapes whose fading silhouettes signaled a world shifting beneath the pressure of human ambition. Writers described the reverent silence beneath ancient canopies, where shafts of sunlight pierced through foliage like stained glass windows in a forgotten chapel, illuminating moss-covered stones and the delicate scaffolding of spider webs that glimmered with morning dew. These accounts traveled into cities where soot darkened the sky and factories roared, stirring public debate about whether forests should be protected, exploited, or transformed into systematically managed resources. Meanwhile, colonial expansion extended the global reach of timber extraction. European powers surveyed forests in Asia, Africa, and the Americas not as sovereign ecosystems, but as inventories. Surveyors marked trees designated for export, and ships bound for far-flung ports carried planks of teak, mahogany, and rosewood that had taken centuries to grow. Logging roads penetrated once isolated jungles, bringing traders, missionaries, and settlers whose presence altered ecological balances in subtle and profound ways. Species that had flourished for millennia along rivers shaded by dense forests found themselves facing new pressures as waterways clogged with runoff or as hunting intensified. Yet amid these upheavals, indigenous knowledge systems continued to document the forest's rhythms, passing down nuanced understandings of when certain plants flowered, how animals responded to seasonal shifts, and which sacred groves must remain untouched to maintain spiritual harmony. In North America, the forests encountered by European settlers stretched seemingly without end, from the pine barrens of the Atlantic coast to the hardwood kingdoms of the Appalachians and the towering sequoias of the Pacific. Explorers wrote of trees so vast that entire families could hollow out fallen trunks to create temporary shelters, and of wood so abundant that it shaped the architecture of frontier life. But as settlements multiplied and railroads carved iron lines across the continent, vast swaths of forest fell to axes and sawmills. Lumber camps sprang up like transient cities along rivers, their sawdust drifting through the air as a constant fog. Rivers themselves, once quiet pathways for canoes and migrating fish, became choked with logs floating toward mills downstream, creaking and rolling in great tangled rafts, guided by men whose boots gripped spiked logs with practiced grace. Despite the toil, many laborers sensed the impermanence of their trade. noting how cleared hillsides eroded and how temperatures shifted when shade gave way to bare, sun-baked ground. The emergence of conservation movements brought new voices to the dialogue. Influential thinkers traveled through forests threatened by rapid development and wrote passionately about the need to protect remaining wilderness. Their appeals resonated with a growing urban population that looked toward forests as places of solace amid increasingly industrialized landscapes. Governments established national parks, setting aside tracts of forest where logging and development were restricted. Rangers documented wildlife, monitored tree health, and guided visitors along paths that wound through groves echoing with birdsong. But these early efforts, while well-intentioned, often overlooked indigenous peoples whose ancestral lands were absorbed into protected areas, disrupting traditional forest stewardship practices that had sustained ecosystems for generations. As scientific understanding expanded, the forest revealed itself to be even more intricate than previously imagined. Researchers discovered fungal networks underfoot that connected trees in vast subterranean webs, allowing them to exchange nutrients and chemical signals. This wood-wide web, as some would later call it, challenged the notion of trees as solitary organisms and illuminated their collaborative survival strategies. One tree attacked by pests could warn its neighbors, prompting them to bolster their defenses. Saplings in shaded understories received nourishment indirectly from older trees, ensuring the forest's continuity across generations. The more scientists studied these interactions, the more they recognized that forests thrived not because of individual strengths, but because of collective interdependence rooted in relationships invisible to the casual observer. Forests also became critical archives of global climate history. By coring ancient trees, researchers extracted cylinders of wood that recorded centuries of environmental conditions. Narrow rings signaled droughts. Wide rings indicated years of abundance. Certain species like bristlecone pines, growing high in the western mountains, offered data spanning thousands of years, extending human understanding of climate far beyond written records. These dendrochronological studies helped reconstruct timelines of volcanic eruptions, migrations, cultural collapses, and long-term temperature cycles. The forest, in this sense, provided not only oxygen and habitat, but context, a grand timeline of Earth's shifting moods, etched layer by patient layer into living memory. In the 20th century, wars once again drew forests into the sphere of conflict. Soldiers found cover beneath canopies that muffled artillery fire and obscured movements. Partisans used forest paths to evade enemy patrols, relying on their knowledge of terrain to survive. In some places, forests suffered devastating collateral damage as bombings set entire stands ablaze, or as military units cleared trees to build fortifications and airfields. Yet, in other regions, forests acted as sanctuaries for displaced populations, providing food, shelter, and concealment when cities became battlegrounds. Trees scarred by bullets or shrapnel continued to grow long after the wars ended, carrying within their annual rings silent testimonies to humanity's upheavals. In the decades that followed, technological progress introduced new threats and new possibilities for forest management. Chainsaws and heavy machinery accelerated logging operations, enabling rapid clearing on unprecedented scales. Tropical rainforests felt these impacts acutely as road networks opened once inaccessible regions to commercial operations that harvested timber, cleared land for agriculture, or mined for minerals. Satellite imagery revealed the alarming extent of deforestation, capturing stark contrasts between lush green expanses and newly barren land. Scientists warned of cascading consequences: loss of biodiversity, changes in rainfall patterns, soil degradation, and disruptions to the global carbon cycle. Yet, alongside these warnings, innovative reforestation projects emerged, experimenting with ways to restore damaged landscapes through mixed planting, assisted natural regeneration, and community-led stewardship. Cultural relationships with forests diversified further in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Urban planners integrated green corridors into cities, recognizing that forests, even in miniature form, improved air quality, reduced heat, and provided psychological benefits. Artists, filmmakers, and writers turned to forests as symbols of mystery, origin, resilience, and transformation, reflecting society's complex feelings toward nature in an age of rapid change. Architects drew inspiration from tree structures, designing buildings with branching supports or natural ventilation systems modeled after forest canopies. Musicians composed works evoking the rhythms of wind and leaves, while scientists used forest acoustics to track elusive species whose voices offered clues to their population health. Forests also became the focal point of global environmental agreements. Nations gathered to discuss carbon sequestration, biodiversity preservation, and sustainable land use, acknowledging that the destiny of forests and the destiny of humanity were inseparable. Yet, these discussions often revealed deep inequalities. Countries with large forest reserves struggled to balance economic needs with conservation, while others called for greater protections without fully addressing their own historical contributions to deforestation. Despite the tensions, collaborative efforts took shape, from cross-border wildlife corridors to international funding for forest protection and traditional land management practices. Meanwhile, on the ground, forests continued their quiet work. Trees exhaled moisture that fed clouds drifting across continents, shaping weather patterns far from their roots. Fallen logs decomposed into rich soil that nurtured new generations. Insects pollinated understory plants, and birds spread seeds across great distances. Predators stalked prey through the underbrush, maintaining the delicate equilibrium that defined each ecosystem. Even in forests recovering from fire, the first sprouts of resilience appeared quickly. fireweed flaming pink against blackened earth, serotinous cones releasing seeds that had waited for heat to crack open their chambers, woodpeckers drumming on charred trunks to feast on beetle larvae attracted by newly exposed bark. In regions shaped by cyclical fire, forests adapted in ways that spoke to the deep intelligence of ecosystems forged over millennia. In the Mediterranean basin, where summers baked hillsides under relentless heat, pines evolved cones sealed with resin that melted only in flame, releasing seeds onto nutrient-rich ash beds. Cork oak forests, tended carefully by generations of harvesters who stripped bark without harming the trees, demonstrated the delicate balance between human use and ecological resilience. In these groves, the quiet industry of rural communities blended seamlessly with natural rhythms, revealing how humans could work alongside forests rather than against them when guided by patience and tradition. In North America's western regions, towering stands of ponderosa pine and Douglas fir grew in patterns dictated by fire frequency. Low-intensity fires once cleared underbrush naturally, maintaining open park-like forests where sunlight dapples the ground and grasses flourish between widely spaced trunks. But as fire suppression became policy across the 20th century, fuel accumulated quietly, creating conditions for the massive destructive wildfires that now redraw entire landscapes. Ecologists studying these systems uncovered the forgotten role of indigenous fire stewardship, which had shaped forest composition long before colonial policies disrupted it. Reviving controlled burns required not only scientific insight, but cultural partnership, recognizing that knowledge preserved through oral tradition carried wisdom modern forestry had overlooked. In the Amazon, meanwhile, researchers revealed how ancient human activity had subtly shaped the forest without diminishing its biodiversity. Terra preta, patches of dark, fertile soil enriched with charcoal, bone, and organic matter, indicated that early civilizations had cultivated pockets of the rainforest with remarkable long-term productivity. Trees bearing edible fruits, such as Brazil nuts and palms, appeared in higher concentrations around archaeological sites, suggesting intentional planting or selective encouragement by past societies. This discovery challenged long-held assumptions that the Amazon had always been a pristine wilderness untouched by human influence, instead highlighting a millennia-old reciprocity between people and forest that enriched both. Elsewhere in the world, the complexity of forest life continued to astonish scientists, armed with new tools for observation. Ultrasonic microphones captured the high-frequency calls of bats darting between branches, revealing elaborate hunting strategies executed in darkness. Camera traps recorded elusive creatures previously known only through tracks or indigenous accounts. Clouded leopards slipping like shadows across Southeast Asian forest floors, eyes tapping rhythmically on Malagasy wood to locate grubs, and snow leopards weaving ghost-like among Himalayan junipers. Each discovery added another stroke to the portrait of forests as intricate, dynamic realms where every species, no matter how small or secretive, played a part in sustaining the whole. Even the soil beneath forest floors emerged as a universe unto itself. Microscopic organisms churned endlessly through decaying leaves, transforming them into nutrients accessible to plants. Mycorrhizal fungi formed mutualistic bonds with roots, extending their reach in exchange for sugars produced through photosynthesis. Nematodes, springtails, and mites moved through humus in numbers exceeding stars in a galaxy, each fulfilling a niche in decomposition, nutrient cycling, or predation. These unseen multitudes defined the health of forests more profoundly than the towering trunks above them, yet their worlds remained largely invisible until microscopes and chemical assays illuminated their hidden labor. As climate patterns shifted, forests faced new challenges that tested their adaptability. Rising temperatures pushed species upslope, altering the composition of montane forests that had remained stable for centuries. Trees adapted to cool, moist conditions found themselves competing with species migrating from lower elevations, and in some regions, suitable habitat shrank until it reached the summit of mountains with nowhere left to expand. In boreal forests, warmer winters allowed bark beetle populations to explode, infesting vast swaths of conifer woodland that had thrived for thousands of years. Dead trees stood like skeletal monuments, their gray trunks stretching for miles, visible even from satellites. Ecologists scrambled to understand the long-term consequences of such rapid, unprecedented change, piecing together data from tree rings, pollen records, and climate models to predict possible futures. In tropical regions, changes manifested differently. Extended dry seasons stressed trees accustomed to rhythmic rainfall, increasing susceptibility to disease and fire. Vine proliferation in some areas strangled young trees before they could reach the canopy, altering forest structure. Species with specialized ecological roles struggled to adapt, while generalist species expanded their ranges. Despite these pressures, forests continued to demonstrate remarkable resilience when disturbances remained within natural bounds. After storms uprooted trees and opened gaps in the canopy, sunlight flooded the forest floor, stimulating bursts of growth among pioneer species. Birds and mammals carried seeds into newly formed clearings, weaving successional cycles that mirrored ancient patterns. Forests also evolved in response to human creativity as new forms of stewardship emerged across continents. Community forestry initiatives empowered local inhabitants to monitor illegal logging, restore degraded areas, and develop sustainable livelihoods tied to forest health. In Nepal, community-managed forests flourished under collective decision-making, reversing decades of deforestation and rejuvenating watersheds. In Costa Rica, reforestation programs supported by ecotourism transformed abandoned pastures into recovering forests, where jaguars, tapirs, and scarlet macaws gradually return. These successes demonstrated that when people recognized the long-term value of forests, restoration could proceed faster than expected. knitting once fragmented landscapes back together. High-tech innovations also began influencing forest research. Drone-mounted sensors mapped canopy structure in breathtaking detail, revealing patterns of growth and disturbance across entire regions. LiDAR pulses pierced layers of foliage to create three-dimensional models showing how trees distributed themselves from ground to canopy. Satellite networks tracked deforestation and regrowth in near real time, enabling governments and conservation organizations to respond to illegal activities with unprecedented speed. Genetic studies uncovered hidden diversity within tree species, identifying adaptations that might help forests withstand future climatic shifts. Scientists used these findings to inform seed banks, reforestation plans, and cross-border cooperation on forest resilience. Yet, even with technological advancements, the forest remained a realm where human senses held enduring importance. The scent of resin rising from freshly warmed pine needles, the cool hush beneath evergreen shade during summer heat, the rustle of creatures unseen but ever present, these impressions shaped emotional connections to forests that science could measure only indirectly. For many communities, forests continued to serve as sources of identity, spirituality, and belonging. Pilgrims still walked paths winding through cedar groves in Japan, where trunks soared like the columns of ancient temples. Syncretic rituals in West Africa honored deities believed to inhabit sacred trees, whose buttressed roots formed natural altars. In the Appalachian Mountains, families preserved cultural traditions of ginseng gathering, hunting, and woodcraft, passing down stories that anchored their heritage to the land. The more people traveled through forests, the more they recognized the astonishing diversity of soundscapes that trees cultivated. In temperate deciduous forests, spring mornings erupted with birdsong, cascading from treetops as warblers returned from migratory journeys spanning entire hemispheres. In tropical rainforests, dusk summoned a crescendo with insect calls that layered into a dense sonic tapestry vibrating with life. In boreal forests, winter stillness amplified the crack of frozen sap as trees adjusted to extreme cold, emitting subtle pops that echoed like distant percussion. These acoustic signatures not only enriched human experience, but provided scientists with tools to monitor biodiversity. Automated recording stations captured soundscapes over months or years, revealing population trends and identifying shifts in species behavior long before visual surveys detected them.
Forests influenced mythology as profoundly as they influenced science. In Norse cosmology, Yggdrasil, the world tree, connected the 9 realms, its roots and branches forming the framework of existence. In Slavic folklore, dense forests were home to enigmatic spirits like the Leshy, protector of woodland animals and mischievous guardian of boundaries. In the literature of medieval Europe, enchanted forests symbolized transformation, trial, and revelation, providing liminal spaces where characters encountered the extraordinary. Indigenous American legends described great trees as ancestral beings who guided migrations, shaped landscapes, or gifted knowledge to their descendants. These stories captured the psychological and symbolic resonance of forests across cultures, attesting to the profound role trees played not only in sustaining bodies, but in nourishing imaginations. As the global understanding of ecosystems matured, forests were increasingly seen as interconnected with distant environments in ways that transcended local boundaries. Moisture released from Amazonian trees fed atmospheric rivers that delivered rain to agricultural heartlands thousands of miles away. Dust blown from the Sahara fertilized the Amazon basin, linking deserts and rainforests in a transoceanic exchange of nutrients. Migratory species tied forests on separate continents into shared ecological cycles, carrying seeds, pollen, and energy across hemispheres. Even ocean currents felt the influence of forests as river discharge carried organic materials into coastal waters, shaping marine productivity. These connections revealed that forests were not isolated green patches on maps, but integral components of a planetary system whose stability depended on the vitality of each part. As scientific understanding deepened, people began to see forests not merely as fixed landscapes, but as dynamic realms shaped by constant flux. Rivers meandering through woodlands carried sediments that nourished floodplain forests, creating shifting mosaics of willow, cottonwood, and alder that thrived on periodic inundation. Windstorms snapped ancient branches or toppled entire trees, opening gaps that allowed sunlight to cascade onto the forest floor in sudden transformative bursts. These disturbances set in motion cycles of regeneration that had defined forest evolution long before humans attempted to categorize them. A fallen giant became a nurse log, its decomposing wood hosting mosses, fungi, and seedlings that grew from its softening bark like new chapters sprouting from an old book. Each gap, no matter how small, represented a resetting of ecological clocks, ushering in a new cohort of life shaped by the conditions of the moment. Deep in tropical rainforests, researchers studying canopy ecology developed new methods to explore the high realms where much of the forest's biodiversity resides. They constructed rope bridges, observation cranes, and inflatable platforms that allowed them to examine epiphytes clinging to branches 50 meters above the ground. These tree-dwelling plants formed miniature ecosystems complete with their own soils, pollinators, and water reserves trapped in leaf axils. Tree frogs laid eggs in tiny pools gathered between bromelia leaves, while insects evolved specialized forms to navigate the intricate architecture of aerial habitat. From this elevated vantage, scientists discovered species previously unknown to science, underscoring how little of the forest had truly been seen, even in an age of satellites and high-resolution imaging.
Meanwhile, the cultural relationship between people and forests remained as varied as the forests themselves. In some societies, forestry emerged as a profession that required mastery of both ecological knowledge and practical skill. Foresters walked the land with measuring tapes and increment borers, assessing tree health, determining sustainable harvest levels, and planning for regeneration decades into the future. Their work demanded an intimate understanding of local soil types, microclimates, species interactions, and growth rates. In Central Europe, traditions of scientific forestry developed in the 18th and 19th centuries, influenced forest management worldwide, emphasizing careful planning and long-term thinking. Yet even these models evolved as new insights revealed the limitations of monocultures and the importance of diversity in resisting pests, disease, and climate uncertainty. In mountainous regions, forests interacted with geological processes in dramatic ways. On steep slopes, trees anchored soil with root systems that prevented landslides during heavy rains. Their presence moderated the flow of meltwater from snowfields, releasing it gradually into streams that fed agricultural valleys below. Without forests, slopes eroded rapidly, clogging rivers with sediment and altering hydrological cycles that sustained human settlements. Villages built on alluvial fans often owed their stability to tree cover far upslope, and the fates of communities intertwined invisibly with forests they might rarely visit. This dependency became evident whenever deforestation occurred at altitude, triggering chain reactions of erosion, flooding, and crop failures that rippled across regions. Forests influence not only landscapes, but economies in ways both direct and subtle. The timber trade fueled industries from shipbuilding to housing to paper production. Resin tapped from pine forests supplied naval stores essential for waterproofing wooden vessels. Chestnut and oak bark, rich in tannins, supported leather tanning industries that thrived alongside forested regions. Maple trees in North America produced sap that indigenous peoples and settlers alike transformed into syrup through labor-intensive boiling, creating a tradition that endured for centuries. The collection of mushrooms, berries, nuts, and medicinal plants provided supplemental income for rural families, intertwining seasonal rhythms of forest foraging with economic livelihood. Different forests bore distinct marks of human adaptation. In the dry forests of India, communities developed methods of collecting tendu leaves for rolling traditional cigarettes, creating a vast seasonal industry. In Japan's Satoyama landscapes, villagers maintained semi-managed forests, where coppiced trees provided firewood and bamboo groves supplied materials for baskets, tools, and construction.
These mosaic landscapes supported high biodiversity precisely because they were shaped by sustainable human activity rather than exploitation. In Eastern Europe, wood pastures created by centuries of grazing livestock among scattered oaks and lindens became unique habitats rich in pollinators and cavity-nesting birds. Such environments blurred the boundary between natural and cultural, revealing that forests often flourished not despite human presence, but because of centuries-long relationships built on reciprocity.
Yet, even as people cultivated deep bonds with forests, global pressures accelerated. Logging companies expanded operations into frontier regions, drawn by rising demand for hardwoods in international markets. Roads built for timber extraction enabled further encroachment, allowing hunters, farmers, and miners to penetrate previously isolated areas. In some places, forests fell in vast swaths so quickly that satellite images captured the progression like frames in a film of unraveling green. Species with limited ranges vanished before they could be documented, and traditional communities found their territories fragmented by concessions granted without their consent. Each loss represented not only the disappearance of habitat, but the erasure of knowledge embedded in languages, rituals, and memories tied to the forest's presence. Still, forests continued to shape human imagination in profound ways. Writers described their experiences walking beneath canopies that filtered light into luminous, shifting patterns. Poets evoked the scent of wet leaves after rain, the hush of snowfall resting on evergreen boughs, or the thrill of encountering a deer stepping silently through dawn mist. Filmmakers framed forests as realms of transformation, portals to other worlds, or symbols of untamed wilderness. Painters captured the play of light across beech trunks in autumn, or the tangled beauty of mangrove roots entwined with tidal flats. By inspiring creativity, forests nurtured cultural expressions that celebrated their mystery and grandeur, even as their physical boundaries receded. Scientific exploration, too, continued to uncover layers of forest complexity previously unseen. Studies of phenology, the timing of biological events, revealed how trees synchronized leaf out and flowering with temperature, daylight, and precipitation cues. As climate change disrupted these patterns, mismatches emerged between species. Birds migrating from wintering grounds sometimes arrived too early or too late to coincide with peak insect abundance. Pollinators encountered flowers blooming before their emergence. Such shifts reverberated through ecosystems, altering interactions honed over evolutionary timescales. Forest researchers documented these changes with a sense of both urgency and awe, recognizing that they were witnessing transformations unparalleled in recorded history. In cold northern forests, winter revealed adaptations honed across epochs. Conifers sustained photosynthesis at low temperatures,
thanks to needle structures optimized for harsh conditions. Snow-laden branches bent without breaking, shedding weight efficiently during thaws. Animals developed strategies to navigate deep snow. Lynxes with wide paws glided across crusted surfaces, while voles tunneled hidden beneath insulating layers where they created networks of runways lined with seeds and grasses.
In tropical forests, the absence of pronounced seasons produced a different set of rhythms. Fruit-bearing trees staggered their cycles across the year, ensuring that food remained available for frugivores whose seed dispersal sustained forest diversity. Certain trees erupted into mass flowering events tied to climactic cues still not fully understood, carpeting forest floors with blossoms that attracted pollinators in tremendous numbers. Leaf flushes tinted canopies with bursts of red and bronze before maturing into deep green. Each cycle unfolded with precision, shaped by evolutionary pressures that balanced competition, reproduction, and survival in environments where even minor advantages influenced long-term success. Water flowed as a unifying force within forests everywhere. In cloud forests perched on tropical mountains, trees captured moisture from drifting mists, funneling it downward through moss-covered branches into soils that fed streams, supporting communities far below. Their unique structure, twisted trunks draped in epiphytes, roots gripping thin soils on steep slopes, created microhabitats teeming with amphibians, insects, and plants found nowhere else. These forests, shrouded in perpetual fog, played an outsized role in regulating regional hydrology. When their coverage diminished, cloud interception dropped sharply, altering water availability in ways felt across entire watersheds. Scientists studying these systems marveled at how forests harnessed atmospheric moisture in delicate, efficient ways unmatched by any human-made technology. In mangrove forests, trees adapted to saltwater environments with remarkable ingenuity. Prop roots arched above water like networks of stilts, providing stability against tides, storms, and sediment shifts. Pneumatophores, specialized aerial roots, protruded from mudflats like clusters of breathing tubes, enabling gas exchange in anoxic soils. These forests sheltered juvenile fish, shielded coastlines from erosion, and sequestered carbon at rates that far exceeded terrestrial forests. Birds nested among branches that withstood brackish conditions, and crabs scuttled among root networks that trapped nutrient-rich sediments. Though often overlooked, mangrove forests formed critical buffers between land and sea, their survival essential to the health of marine and terrestrial realms alike. In the temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, moisture-laden winds from the ocean collided with mountains, producing some of the most lush and biomass-rich forests on Earth. Sitka spruce, western hemlock, and Douglas fir grew to monumental sizes in environments where decomposition kept pace with growth, recycling nutrients at astonishing rates. Fallen logs carpeted the forest floor, hosting nurseries of seedlings that sprouted from their decaying wood. Mosses cloaked every surface, absorbing and releasing water like living sponges. Salmon runs, driven by ancient instinct, carried marine nutrients into forest systems when bears, wolves, and eagles dragged carcasses into the woods. These nutrient transfers fed trees whose rings recorded not only climactic events, but the pulse of ocean cycles. The tropical dry forests of Central America, in contrast, endured long, rainless months each year. Trees responded by shedding leaves to conserve water, leaving branches bare until the first rains returned in dramatic displays of renewal. In places, flowering trees painted the dry season landscape with explosions of pink, yellow, and orange before foliage returned. Animals adapted to endure scarcity. Monkeys traveled long distances in search of fruit. Armadillos burrowed deeper into cool soil. And insects timed life cycles to coincide with brief periods of abundance. These forests, though overshadowed by their evergreen counterparts, held extraordinary biodiversity and cultural significance for communities who depended on their seasonal gifts. In every region, forests carried the imprints of past climates like layered palimpsests. Pollen grains preserved in lake sediments revealed shifting distributions of species as ice sheets advanced and retreated. Charcoal fragments told stories of ancient fires sparked by lightning or intentionally set by early humans shaping their landscapes. Fossil leaves recorded atmospheric carbon content through microscopic structures in their surfaces, allowing paleobotanists to reconstruct environmental conditions millions of years old. These archives revealed that forests had migrated across continents, expanded into new territories, and contracted in the face of cooling or drying climates. The forests of today represented only a snapshot of an ever-changing tapestry woven across epochs. And in the present moment, despite pressures both ancient and modern, forests continued their tireless work of renewal. Seeds nestled into soil carried the genetic legacy of ancestors who survived droughts, storms, pests, and upheavals of every kind. Winds scattered them across distances great and small, while animals buried, dropped, or consumed them, inadvertently planting the next generation. Roots anchored into earth, seeking water and nutrients with quiet persistence. Leaves unfurled to capture sunlight, transforming it into sugars that fueled countless forms of life. Beneath the surface, fungi stitched together networks of possibility, linking trees into communities whose strength lay not in individual might, but in collective resilience.